Well, NATO is pushing for nuclear war with Russia and China, it seems. Pretty much any takers that will play nuclear roulette with us. That's what NATO wants. They are selling it to us as peace, though. I'm going to show you the documents that NATO released this week at the summit. And as you look at this, tell me that this does not seem like dystopic fiction, but it's real. This is our reality. So let's take a look. This, my friends, is what we were warned about by George Orwell. Here is the declaration that NATO published for their 75th anniversary meeting in Washington, D.C. The declaration has strong language about Russia, China, and nuclear weapons. And in response, take a look at what Russia says. Okay, you're going to do this? We are considering changing our nuclear doctrine then. What are Russia specifically and China responding to? Well, they're responding to this. This is part of the doctrine I just showed you. And this is NATO specifically saying now, we are a nuclear alliance. This sentence that I highlighted for you stopped me in my tracks today. This is NATO saying this. As long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. Is that chilling to you? That means every NATO member is eligible to have and may already have, or else they will have, nukes on their territory. That's a mic drop, right?
Yeah, and we can put shorter range nuclear weapons into Poland. We can put them all throughout. We can put them in Germany if we want to, all aimed direct. So think about this if the shoe were on the other foot, right? The Monroe Doctrine of having nuclear weapons or any sort of offensive weapons inside of the Western Hemisphere, i.e. the Cuban Missile Crisis. We can hold up our Monroe Doctrine and tell you, no, we don't allow that inside, near the United States in the Western Hemisphere. We wouldn't stand for it.
Yes. No, clearly not. But they're saying any NATO member, including Ukraine, Finland, and Sweden, you get that too. I mean, I wonder how you feel about that if you're from Finland or Sweden. Your leaders have applied to join NATO, and that means you get nukes inside your territory. Does that feel awesome? Did you want that?
What would happen if it went the other way? If all the BRICS nations got together and said, you know what, we're going to form the same alliance. So Cuba, Saudi Arabia, all these other countries, they're like, well, now we're going to have nukes as well.
Right. Well, that's the world that we're setting ourselves up for.
I mean, and that's frankly what has started to unfold with BRICS. It's, not just a financial alliance. It's starting to become a security alliance.
Well, today, actually, Putin said that BRICS should, or consider, I suppose, is the language he used, becoming a parliamentary organization, which would mean what? Something like the European Union? Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, that's unfolding before our very eyes. So we're seeing clear delineation of the world, East versus West, with nuclear weapons and opposing laws. We're not heading towards a peaceful world, you guys.
Well, Chico Kid 530 in our Rumble chat says, remember, Ukraine is not a NATO member yet. And of course, we've heard over the past 24 hours, Ukraine's ascension to NATO is all but certain to happen.
Right. We'll call them nuclear or NATO juniors, like they're the junior league being called up, or at least the promise of such. But because of the application and because NATO is now saying they are full on a nuclear force, well, then anyone who's an ally, right, could hold nuclear weapons. Now, we're going to talk in a second about bioweapons because Ukraine does hold Western bioweapons. So it's not that much of a step further. Why are we already putting bioweapons in Ukraine? You wouldn't see that it's much more of a line to put nuclear weapons. So again, yep.
And I just want to point also that our currencies have become a weapon these days too. I mean, we use the dollar. The dollar's been weaponized for sanctions and stuff. So it's like, they consider that, like, if they use something other than the dollar, that's a potential, weapon used against us. So they'd be like, oh, well, we can justify using other means now.
Right. Now, this phrase that I just showed you, as long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO is a nuclear country. Is there a way to put that horse back in the barn? Let me know what you think of that. Now, here is why they lay out that these threats mean that NATO has to be nuclear. I've highlighted the countries that they're telling us are the problems. They are the familiar groups: Iran, the People's Republic of China, and Russia. They said that NATO countries are confronted by hybrid cyber, space, and other threats and malicious activities from state and non-state actors. Anything stand out to you there, boys? Anything?
China.
I like the China, yeah, but also I always find it funny when they're like Iran's destabilizing actions juxtaposed. I'm not even going to try to say that word again. And compared to like the U.S., who is stabilizing where? What like?
Yes.
That's kind of. Are we just upset that's
all we do?
That they're stepping on our territory?
Right.
It's all we do is stabilize the world. Everywhere we go, the United States stabilizes the world.
Yes. Ask Panama how much we did that for
The United
them.
States is like when people fold up those napkins and they shove them under a wobbly table. Like that's what we do. You know, like when you're at a Chick-fil-A, just fold up some napkins, shove them under a table. That's what the United States is. We stabilize the world.
I want to look at the chat and see if anybody else saw what I saw there. Space. You guys, when did NATO say they're going into space? That's new.
Well, of course, that's when we created the Space Force, right?
No, that's American, right? Yes, America has been upping the rhetoric around space wars. But since when did NATO get involved? This is new to me. Take a look at this next slide. It said they are going to accelerate space. The integration of space into planning, exercises, and multi-domain operations with NATO's Space Operations Center. The third one down there, this is an LOL. They're going to strengthen the protection of critical undersea infrastructure, CUI. Well, that's funny because I remember a NATO country recently being the victim of a Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. That was Germany. So are they very interested in who blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
No.
No. Or are they just going to prevent further CUI events? Like, we don't want any more of that. I mean, they're not very big on finding that out, even though Germany is the victim of that. That's weird, right? And again, they're not really doing that now. They just said that they will. And then the last one, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense. Of course, whenever NATO says defense, we're going to read this as offense. These are the things they are doing, right? And biological weapons clearly are something NATO is going to be doing, but only for defense, right? Remember when Victoria Nuland said that to Congress? Yes, NATO countries do have biological weapons, but only for defense.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Last question. I am certain that the Russians were looking at their their reserves as a way to buffer sanctions. Do you know how, now that we've sanctioned the central bank along with others, do we have an idea of what percentage of their reserves are frozen or inaccessible to them?
Virtually all of them are now frozen. You notice that the country's been under currency controls for almost 2 weeks now, and the whole point of putting so many of these top 10 banks under sanctions is to make it impossible for them to get access to their cash in hard currency.
Okay, so that one doesn't hold up, right?
Just enjoying some of the chat room today about Victoria Nuland, that she's Satan's wife, that she causes erectile dysfunction.
Okay, you know how I feel about hag baiting Victoria Nuland. She is odious enough in and of herself.
She is she's walking Satan.
Right. Okay. So again, those 46 U.S. biolabs in Ukraine were only defensive. So now every NATO country will have defensive chemical and biological weapons labs.
Great.
Got that?
Great.
Yeah.
And what happened to the ones that were already there? that Russia was warning us about. We called it propaganda, Russian propaganda, and then it was confirmed
that they were there. Well, a lot of them are in the Donbas region, which are now under control of the Russians. So we don't get to know. All we get to know is this document that I just showed you said that NATO is investing in chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense. Again, when I see defense, I read offense. NATO's working on these things, but they say because they are a peaceful organization.
Well, and this is something that's just I've never been able to wrap my head around. So if you have nuclear weapons, that's like the ultimate deterrent. Why the hell do you still need to make biological weapons? Because, I mean, you still have the same, like, if you use chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons on you, we will nuke you. It works that way for everything. Why does it have to be a tit for tat? It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I think it's
like when you raid the spider and then you hit it with a shoe. You got to come back in and make double sure, you know?
You spray it with a mustard gas.
Right. And then you also...
it's still kind of twitching, and then let's just drop a nuke on it.
Right. I think that raid spider analogy is exactly what NATO is hoping to do. You got it? I think just like me.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. All right. So interesting. And now as for China, this is how they figure that China is responsible for the war in Ukraine. They're saying that the PRC, the People's Republic of China, has to uphold their principles of the UN Charter, and they are responsible because they transfer dual-use materials such as weapons, components, equipments, and raw material that serve as inputs for Russia's defense sector. They say China cannot enable the largest war in Europe. Hilarious that it's China enabling the longest war in Europe in recent history without the negatively impacting its interest and reputation. So by that logic, right, okay, the United States is enabling the war in Ukraine. I don't see it any other way. But okay, by this logic, the United States is enabling the war on Gaza, if that's what we're doing. So is this okay? At least 27 people have been killed and 53 people injured in the reported strike at a school in Gaza that was sheltering civilians. And it has been reported that those missiles came from the United States. So by this logic, right, it can't be a double standard. China provides weaponry and they are responsible, but we are not for wherever our bullets and weapons and missiles go? Clearly not. That's a double standard. I guess that's okay, but China should be held responsible for its ties with Russia because we lie about the reason for the war in Ukraine. Here's what China says about that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just the difference of the United States does it for good. China does it for bad. We have to remember that.
For
like
profit.
Everything the United States does, we do it for the good of the world.
We're stabilizing.
Sure.
We're stabilizing.
Gaza. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Here's China's response to that. A spokesperson said that this is biased, slanderous, and provocative, and called NATO a relic of the Cold War. Here's what a spokesperson said: that without any evidence, NATO continues to spread falsehood fabricated by the U.S. So they know who's behind it, who's writing the press releases. It's the United States. Openly smearing China, sowing discord between China and Europe, and undermining China-European cooperation. They say that China's EU mission countered NATO's accusations by warning the alliance to stay out of Asia, which it said was not a wrestling ground for geopolitical competition. Here they say NATO should not become the disruptor of peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific or a tool used by certain great powers to maintain hegemony. So if you think that NATO is speaking the language of a peaceful and defensive organization, you're not listening, clearly. And we have leaders of these member states that just continue to turn up the volume with every passing day. Germany's like, sure, nuclear war. We're pretty close to Russia, but we'll play this game. Take a look at this from Der Spiegel today, saying the West must clearly clarify whether it is ready for war against Putin. The German people are really not being involved in this decision. Their leaders are letting it happen anyway because the United States has announced that it will deploy previously banned nuclear capable missiles to Germany. That's just going to happen, you guys, because we threw this big party, this big 75th anniversary NATO event. We just keep making these war decisions. Like,
Who's
hey,
making-
yay, party, 75th anniversary NATO. We're shipping fighters
F-16s.
to
Yeah, who's making that
F-16s to
decision?
Ukraine.
That was something President Biden said would not happen. But because
Right.
he's out to lunch and demented, who's actually running the country?
It's just happening under the guise of this party. It's wild. Friend of the show, Ralph Schulheimer, said this on X today, that the difference between now and the Cold War is that back then, everyone involved understood that a direct confrontation between NATO and the Soviet Union has to be avoided. We didn't want that. Whatever your take is, but to ignore the risks of war between nuclear powers is just insane. Absolutely true. We only have insane people going along with this. But RFK Jr. said this on X today, and it was at least a bit of a cooling salve. He says that NATO was founded as a defensive alliance to protect Western Europe from the Soviet Union. When the Berlin Wall fell, George Bush should have gone to Berlin and announced mission accomplished. Instead, NATO morphed into an expansionist, offensive alliance, provoking war instead of preserving peace and keeping the dollar flowing to the military contractors. As president, I won't disband NATO. I will transform NATO into a true peace alliance dedicated to global disarmament. Now, I like, if we could keep this up on the screen, I like everything he says there, but I don't think the last two sentences are really, or the last sentence, the last two. How are you going to do that? You don't disband NATO, but transform it? I mean, that's like making the dark side the good side.
You got to throw it out. You got to, as Colonel McGregor has said on our show multiple times, it's going to die. It needs to collapse. And so I don't think that you can transform it. You have to get rid of everyone in this organization.
Look here, Darth Vader.
Put the genie
You're the
back in the
good
bottle.
side now. Right.
Yeah. I think it's impossible. Viktor Orban today said the same thing. NATO needs to go back to its roots as a peaceful organization. Right?
Yeah.
But it's not. And you have two NATO members now are standing up and saying absolutely not. No weapons going to these regions. So some members of NATO are saying, don't do this craziness. Don't be sending these long-range weapons into Germany, these Tomahawk cruise missiles and other spots. So at least there are some cooler heads still in NATO, like Viktor Orban, but that's about it.
But it's happening under the guise of pomp and circumstance. That's the thing that's so upsetting, is all of these parades and speeches. And it's like, and here you go. Here's a bunch of warmongering that's real, nukes in your country.
That's like taking one of the medieval torture chambers and turning it into like a lounge with all the spike weapons and everything.
Right.
Yeah, this used to be where people would be stretched and their feet would be tied and bound, but now it's a pedicure chair. So I hope you enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, let us know what you think of this. If you see any silver lining to the NATO 75th anniversary summit that we do not see, I find it terrifying, but maybe you're having a good time at the parties and you like all the speeches and the flags and the cocktails. So let me know what you think.